very few people really understand what money and wealth are.
Andrew Craig is the author of personal finance books, including How to Own the World, which he's now updated for the under 30s. If you had 25-year-old you sat next to you there, what's the one thing that today you would say to them?
Almost every great success story is a story of compounding. Look at when stock markets were invented and look at the trajectory of the human experience since then.
Welcome back, first of all.
Great to be back.
Third time now?
Yeah.
Yeah, good stuff. Yeah. I've said it before, I'll say it again. Your book was probably the biggest influence on me investing, getting started, because it was the first book where I read it and I was like, oh, I get this. I was under 30 at the time. The latest version of the book is targeted specifically at people under 30. Why did you feel that you needed to release a new version?
So basically, by the way, thank you very much again.
It's all right.
It doesn't get old after 10, 12 years, whatever it's been.
It's all for you.
Thank you very much. No, I mean, it's hugely appreciated always because, books are a pretty brutal labour of love. So when you go through all of that, I mean, get the old violin out. But when, you're pleased when people get something out of it and if you sell a few. But the new one basically came about really organically and it's a kind of demand pull thing, which is basically, within probably days of selling the first few copies of How to Own the World back in the day, I had emails from parents, grandparents, great aunts, great uncles, and then in the fullness of time, like secondary school teachers, university lecturers saying, really loved your book. Have you thought about doing one for a younger audience? And specifically actually teenagers. An awful lot of people said, I wish my sort of 16, 17, 18-year-old could get this information. And obviously one of the key points is compounding. So, if you do get, I always use that example about if a wealthy relative can put $5,000 away into a kid's account the day they're born, at US equity rates of return for the last century, they'll have not far off £1 million on their 55th birthday with no further investment. $5,000 when they're naught at 55.
The comments going, oh, but what about inflation?
Yeah, well, and anyway,
you don't want your £1 million
no,
then, do you?
Correct. I know, but I love the way people are like, you're an idiot. You haven't talked about inflation. So I've just, written like literally 50,000 words about inflation and shot loads of videos.
Yeah, and they can add to it. $1 million just for the 5K is not a bad deal in any world.
It's just an illustration of what's possible. But anyway, that was the insight from a lot of really kind people who got in touch. And said, look, wouldn't it be a great idea to write a book for a younger audience? And then cards on the table, what then happened was I got a 2-book deal, 4 years ago now, when I quit my full-time job. One of them was the biotech book that you very kindly talked to me about a year or so ago. And the other one was this one, which was originally going to be called something like Owning the World for Teenagers or for Teens. And I was going to say, cards on the table, what happened there was I can't write a book for teens.
No.
I just sat there, I was like,
Riz.
yeah, exactly. I'm trying to come up with some, the
Even
right
that
sort of, I was about to say,
Ali G in the house.
That's 20 years out of date.
Ali G, I can do that, but there you go. That's how, I don't even know what social media platform teenagers are on. Yeah. And it was actually pretty car crash. All sort of my early drafts was sort of, it was trying to walk the line between being, down with the kids, which is absolutely not what you want to be, as we've just laughed about, but try and, get the right information across and actually write a book that sort of had teeth and meant something. And I was struggling, and I was partly struggling because I had a lot of other work to do. But what then happened was I also thought along the way, not only do I struggle to write in the voice for a teenager, and I probably don't, if I was a secondary school teacher, and I spoke to an award-winning secondary school teacher, and lots of other people along the way. But actually, probably the bigger point is that everything I do is very sort of mission driven about tangible outcomes for people. We have our cheesy company motto, which is like to improve the financial affairs of as many people as possible. And that's a real thing. I think part of the reason Britain's in so much trouble at the moment is hugely because of financial illiteracy. And so, if we want to get that tangible outcome, realistically, even if you wrote the best possible book for a 16 or 17-year-old, and even if you had the swottiest, keenest, hardest working 16 or 17-year-old who read it went, this is amazing, they're not earning any money.
They've got nothing to deploy in the market.
Correct. And roll on.
And it's deaf ears.
Yeah, roll on 4 or 5 years and, they've gone to university or started in the workplace or whatever. So I think so what became clear was to get a tangible outcome and write a book for a younger audience. The publisher and I just came up with this idea of just doing one for under 30s, Because actually, to your point, you read it at that, a lot of people, that's already kind of a natural overlap in my audience. And then sort of more broadly, as always happens with a 100,000 word whatever project, I think it was 80,000 words in the final edit, but 100 plus on the way to creating it. It takes on a life of its own. And so what actually ended up happening, which I'm really pleased about, is because I've kind of been meaning to do an updated version of How to Own the World anyway, because it's like 12, 13 years old now, and even the third edition was an update, but it was a evolution, not a revolution. And in that time, I've shot 50 videos, I've done dozens and dozens of podcast interviews, I've thought about things, I've read loads of stuff, and it's not, you guys know that my whole thing is kind of like the nuts and bolts of how finances work since financial markets were invented. I am absolutely not, you should buy the S&P today, or you should short Bitcoin. That's absolutely not what I do. It's a really, really holistic, big picture, top down, learn about capital markets. And then these are sort of really evergreen approaches to succeeding in using capital markets. That having been said, there were various kind of, if you like, sort of greatest hits from How to Own the World, from my second book, Live on Less, Invest the Rest. And actually, there's a bit in there from Our Future is Biotech, from my third book. So it's all sort of sewn together. It's a very nicely updated version of How to Own the World. And actually, I would say this, wouldn't I, to try and engender a bigger sort of sales audience, but it's not like a 45-year-old will read it and go, "Oh, this is no use to me," right? Mm-hmm. I think if I can capture an under 30s audience, that has the biggest chance of really helping somebody's life financially. But I would hope that all the information in this book is just as relevant to people all the way up to maybe their 50s, right? So that's how it came about. And probably the single most important theme that came from Live on Less, Invest the Rest, if I'm sort of stitching all that content together, is this idea of 100 minus your age, which wasn't in How to Own the World. And that was, I kind of knew about 100 minus your age when I wrote How to Own the World, but I think things just developed organically so that sort of came to the fore as a really nice one-stop shop idea that people need to know. Like, how do you think in a really elegant way of how to allocate to kind of riskier stuff against more defensive stuff, which is super important. How do you do asset allocation? And 100 minus your age is just a way of figuring that out, which was the basis of my second book, really.
Can you explain that for our audience?
So explaining it. Yeah. Sorry, I'm assuming too much knowledge.
Assuming too much.
Yeah, so 100 minus your age is basically, it's not my idea. It's probably been around since the 40s or 50s. And it was probably popularized by John or Jack Bogle, the guy who founded Vanguard, who's massive industry legend, who basically was behind the creation of passive ETF index funds, which obviously your audience are very familiar with. And 100 minus your age is a very simple rule of thumb that just says you subtract your current age from 100. So let's say you're 30, 100 minus your age, 30 is 70, and that gives you the percentage of assuming you're investing something every month. 100 minus your age, so you're 30, 70, is the percentage of that investment that should go into higher risk, higher return assets, with the rest in lower risk, lower return assets. So the original idea was the aggressive, risky bit was equities. These are all American ideas, so that would have been like the Dow Jones 30, or nowadays the S&P 500. And the rest would have been in US treasuries, like 10-year US government bonds. The world's moved on. And so in my second book, Live on Less, Invest the Rest, what I did was, rather than equities and bonds, which is the old school way of doing it, I just switched that into aggressive stuff and defensive stuff, and then go through what is aggressive and what is defensive. But basically, if you use 100 minus your age, it's about, because I'm regulated by the FCA hate one size fits all panacea. Like, what's the answer for everyone? It's this. Like, you're not supposed to do that. You're supposed to think about people's personal circumstances, which is right, 100%. Because, a 30-year-old who's just sold their company for $50 million to Google is a very different person to a 30-year-old who's on minimum wage. Yeah. And how they should invest is different. But if there is a really nice, elegant rule of thumb way that probably gets that, Pareto 80-20 thing, like gets you 80% of the result with 20% of the effort, 100 minus your age is a really elegant idea. Because, when you're 30, you're 70% shares, 30% something defensive. And when you're 50, you're 50-50. And when you're 70, you're 70-30 the other way, right? 70% defensive, 30% aggressive. And the only thing, which I cover all of this in the new book, and I covered it in Live on Less, Invest the Rest. This idea comes from a time when, firstly, interest rates were much higher. So if you, let's say you're 50 and you're 50% in shares and 50% in cash or bonds or defensive stuff, and the interest rate's 6%, you get a very different outcome than when the interest rate's
better return than the zero that we've kind of been conditioned to over the last 20
exactly,
years,
which is why I've sort of morphed it into talking about defensive rather than bonds. And so
we are kind of going back into that world. We've gone back into it. Higher real rates.
Higher rates.
Yeah.
If you are cynical about, if you're cynical about inflation numbers, as you know I am, real rates, i.e. the real rate of return once you've taken account for real inflation, by which I would mean monetary debasement, the rate at which the money supply is growing and therefore our money is falling in value. It's really tough, and this is all treated in the new book, and so it's, I am pretty proud of it because I think it just stitches together all of the really key bits from the two original books, ostensibly for an under 30s audience, but workably for people who are a bit older. And just in terms of the sort of greatest hits bit that came out of the biotech book, I sort of start the whole thing off, with my sort of tub thumping, table banging, why investment's so important and it's life changing. And if millions more people did it, their lives would be better and society would be better and all that stuff. And as part of that, I do have a bit of a slightly pretentious word, an apologia, or what's the word I'm looking for? I basically elucidate.
I forgot you come with
loads of pretentious words. Let's
the buzzers.
It's
too far for me to reach.
Can we cut that out of the edit?
What does that mean?
I've basically.
Don't know.
I have no idea.
Cool.
It's just a silly word. No, basically, it's a sort of. I tackle head on how kind of critical we are as a society now in terms of the zeitgeist, the contemporary zeitgeist, and particularly younger folk, of capitalism, and and we've really have forgotten what stock markets, basically nowadays very few people really understand what money and wealth are. And so the big point I make at the beginning of the book is to sort of refresh all the arguments around they're just technologies, and particularly capital markets are just a technology, whether you're talking about bonds or equities that have been around for a few hundred years, that enable human beings to share risk across large groups of people and do incredible things that one person or a very small group of people couldn't do. And without them, we wouldn't have smartphones, we wouldn't have the internet, we wouldn't have aeroplanes, we wouldn't have skyscrapers. So, all of the wonderful fruits of modernity or sports stadiums, right? All of the things that make our lives great and we take for granted, or a lot of them. They say the best things in life are free, right? So I'm not talking about relationships or religion or whatever else might float your boat. I'm talking about the tangible material things that have lifted us out of a world of grinding poverty for almost all human beings that ever existed in history. What I ask people to do at the beginning of the book is look at when stock markets were invented, roughly 300 years ago, the Dutch and the British, 16 something, right? And look at the trajectory of the human experience since then. Right, and this is the broad point. And I really wanted to make this case with tons of evidence, because then the other bit is, and capitalism's eating the world, which is, I don't want to go too off piece, but this stuff's really important to me. And it's like my own personal experience working with the biotech sector for the last 10 years is it's actually capitalistic entities that almost no people in the population are talking about, because unless you read like New Scientist or, if you're reading the mainstream press or looking at everybody being angry with each other on social media, you're not hearing about tens of thousands of businesses that are capitalistic entities that are doing amazing things for the world, that are actually achieving really incredible things for like getting plastics out of our oceans or taking heavy metals out of our soils. And I'm talking now about the biotech industry. So I'm rambling away as usual.
Do you have any examples of those? Because never hear good news these days.
So take. Have you heard of Greta Thunberg?
Of course, yeah.
Have you heard of Boyan Slat?
No.
Right, so this is my point. This is my point about negative press bias, right? So Boyan Slat, he's a young Dutch guy who said when he was really young, Greta Thunberg, age, what was she, 12 or whatever, I'm not going to go to school, I'm going to protest, and it becomes this big thing. And meanwhile, Boyan Slat has a similar feeling about plastics in our oceans, right? So what's he done? He's started a company called the oceancleanup.org or whatever. He's got out there, he's raised millions and millions of dollars from a proper who's who of, Hollywood folks and big VC funds in America. And he's making a phenomenal dent in the massive garbage patch of plastics in the middle of the Pacific. They've developed these things called river interceptors that are sitting on the mouths of most of the big rivers in the world, particularly in the developing world, that pump, thousands of plastic bottles that come out. Everybody just throws their trash in those rivers, and it, cynical people criticize what he's doing. Oh, it's a drop in the ocean. It's not going to make a difference. But anything like that is laudable, and then it compounds. And so, particularly when I wrote Our Future is Biotech, I've spent 10 plus years looking at biotech and life sciences businesses, and 3 years writing that book and researching that book. In the original manuscript, without wanting to sound too pretentious again, had 650 footnotes in it, which were all academic papers or books or whatever. And I found, tons and tons and tons of companies doing amazing things. And not, when you say biotech, people think therapeutics, like curing cancer or whatever, but it's about rolling back environmental degradation. It's about improving processing power. It's about all sorts of things. So I guess, but anyway, I sort of getting back to the new book. The broad point was I just wanted to lay out in black and white with a lot of evidence that capital markets are great. Aspiring to be wealthy is really good, because that's the other point. Is like this. It's become really fashionable. Like, oh, I don't want to be rich. Rich people are. Like
rich people are evil.
Not in this room, mate. Not in this room. We're called Making Money. Damien talks money.
Yeah, exactly. Maybe not on a podcast called Making Money. Yeah, quite.
Okay, T, talk to me about your attitudes towards risk.
I mean, I like a bit of risk in my investments, but I definitely would say since the podcast, I've toned it down a little bit, not quite as gung-ho and carefree as I was in risk. So yeah.
Yeah, shooting from the hip all the time, weren't you? Yeah. I think personally that you should take risks, but it should always be in areas where you have a unique skill set, an edge, expertise, like your job, things like this.
Definitely.
One area that I wouldn't take any risks is compliance.
Yeah, the risk changes as you grow in business, and you need to be on top of it, which is why we partner with Vanta.
Vanta automates a lot of risk processes and helps you see your risks in a centralized platform, so you know what really needs your attention.
Besides risk, the main thing Vanta does is automate compliance with security protocols you need to scale, like GDPR, HIPAA, ISO 27001, and SOC 2.
The beauty of Vanta is they make it easy to prove you're compliant with these standards, saving you up to 90% of the time it takes. And on average, $500,000.
If you know what these acronyms like SOC 2 are, you probably need Vanta. You can book in a demo at vanta.com/making money. There's a link in the description.
But, and I think this is really problematic because it's like, there's this really famous, I think it's Balzac, who said, behind every fortune is a great crime. And I think like 500 years ago, that was absolutely true.
It's a horrible way to think about it, isn't it?
Yeah, correct. But it's not true. It's actually, if anything, it's the reverse nowadays. Behind every great fortune, by definition, or not all of them, but a lot of them, you've created, what is wealth? It's value. Like
I see people criticize Amazon all the time, but you're getting these next day packages to the door, and I'm like, you're using that service, changed your life.
You said Amazon. I was not going to go there because I've used this example quite a lot recently. But let's just unpack Amazon quickly. So Jeff Bezos owns 8.6% of Amazon last time I checked. Right, let's call it 10%, keep the maths easy. And I don't know where Amazon's trading now after the ructions the last few days. Call it $2 trillion value, right? So Bezos worth $200 billion. The rest of the world is worth $1.8 trillion. In no insignificant part because of Bezos as a vector, working his arse off, going through loads of risk.
How much wealth he created for others.
Correct. So he's created 1.8. Where is the 1.8 trillion? Amazon's worth 2 trillion. 200 billion is his. It's less than that actually, but it's 10-ish%. 1.8 trillion, where is that? It's in the pension accounts of hundreds of millions of people all over the world. Anybody who owns an S&P 500, fund, and indeed tens of thousands of other funds.
AWS has created billions of
trillions of other value.
Exactly.
So Exhibit A is, so the next thing says, the $200 billion he has, has he just bought huge amounts of champagne and thousands of Ferraris with that? And
does he a wedding?
Yeah,
nice expensive wedding.
Okay, he spent a lot of money.
That looked pretty baller.
But is he lying around like Smaug the Dragon out of The Hobbit on a big pile of
gold?
No. What's he doing with it? Young entrepreneurs are going into his family office week in, week out, going, I've got this idea for whatever amazing technology. Will you put $5 million into it? That's what rich people do, right? They are mission driven to create more wealth, and he is spending it on what's it called, Blue Origin rockets, because he's a billionaire and wants to do rockets. We can agree or disagree on whether that's a good thing to do with lots of money. AWS, to your point, is the backbone of a huge part of the internet, and I think a lot of people who criticize Bezos and go, oh, billionaire wanker, actually probably don't know that. They don't know that they're probably saying that on internet infrastructure that right? Yeah, and they're doing it, So then the next thing is, to your point, how many people criticize Bezos but use Amazon to get what? To get products more cheaply. All I guess I'm saying, take a step back. And we're just talking about Amazon. You mentioned Amazon, and I get my high horse
trying
about
to pin it on me.
Yeah, it's your fault. It's your fault that I'm ranting on about
Maybe
Amazon.
they should pay people a little bit
But I think
more,
people need to think a lot more deeply about the fact that, okay, has Amazon I will concede that they underpay their factory workers,
warehouse
and work them hard.
And that, correct. But they're all going to get replaced by robots within the next 10 years anyway, right? So
you can feel bad about that.
Yeah. But what does that mean we should be doing as a society? It means we should make sure that people are educated enough not to have those jobs, right? Yeah. So and that is a much better way of. And by the way, I'll probably really put my head above the parapet here. I half wonder what sort of charitable contribution people like Bezos are making to educational initiatives in places like Seattle. I don't know for a fact, but I'd imagine they probably do, right?
They all like building universities, don't they? Because you get your name on it for life. Vanderbilt and all this kind of stuff.
Like Carnegie and Carnegie Mellon and all that. But anyway, the broader point is as a vector for humanity, this is where it comes down to understanding what wealth is, right? Actually, because I think people have a really poor understanding of what billionaires are assholes. You can only be a billionaire. Most billionaires are minority shareholders, or many billionaires are minority shareholders in the business they built. Steve Jobs is, Bezos is, Musk is, although he's obviously a very highly, he's right at the top of the tree in terms of what's that all worth. But then you get down to much more normal, billionaires who are involved in like a shipping company in Norway, and then centimillionaires, millionaires. You can only be wealthy if your wealth is a fraction of the aggregate value you've created for mankind, like in the main, which is. Most people don't understand that stuff, right? And what does that mean? That you've created a hell of a lot of good for mankind. And also in a capitalistic system, people have only bought that thing voluntarily. Nobody forces you to shop at Amazon. Nobody forces you to buy a Sony TV or I was saying Nokia phone. Now Apple phone, that's another example of gales of creative destruction. Like, capitalism's so monopolistic. The big winners win, and then they're, you can't displace them, and that happens for a while. But look at Nokia, like 30 years ago, or how 20 years ago, Nokia, Sony Ericsson, and Siemens were the biggest 3 mobile phone companies. Where have they gone? So there's a constant changing of the guard. I think we're probably at a bit of a tense point at the moment where the biggest companies are too big. I would contend that's largely because of government. And we're going down proper rabbit holes now, and I'm rambling.
They're anti-competition because they've got such resources that they can just anyone who's coming up, they go, "Do you want £1 billion?" And people find it really hard to turn down £1 billion. Do you know what I mean? 100%. So they just gobble them up,
and then sort of R&D and innovation gets quite sclerotic because there's a load of evidence from academia that says that basically big company, look, IBM and General Electric 20 years ago were huge and created all the new products, and now where are they? They're actually relatively small company. Like, it's always the newcomers that do, like Apple's the classic example because it was like, it made small tangential pink computers for grannies and artists, and then suddenly it became this behemoth that owns the smartphone market, right? And that's happened in 20 years. But I'm not sure where I'm conscious. I'm just rambling away.
It's okay. What I would like to ask then is, I think, what anyone can tell about you when you talk is that you're optimistic about finance, life, human prosperity, the ability to get more. Like these are all good things in your mind.
Yeah.
I follow you on LinkedIn as well, and I often see almost like a slight contradiction there. I see you in the comment section talking about index funds and saying, you critical evaluations sometimes where you're like, there's a load of investors buying stuff that they don't know what the value is, and they're just wall of money. That's why valuations are getting stretched, and index funds are potentially distorting the market. So I try and balance these two Andrews that I see, and I would like to know which one. Am I characterizing that correctly? And where do you sit with that?
So you can balance them. I think they're not contradictory. So one is, ETFs are a really good thing, and more people need to be investing. And it's great that somebody can buy 500 US stocks or 1,600 world stocks through an MSCI World, or 3,000, whatever it is, through a FTSE World. And that my books and the new one included are all about the aggressive bit, which that 100 minus your age, the aggressive bit is covered off by a big index fund, right? And I have a whole laundry list of why people shouldn't go anywhere near single stocks. Most people investing in single stocks don't know 3% of what you need to know before what's an EV
I think that's
EBITDA
being
ratio.
generous. I think most people are picking it because their mates said they should.
Well, you know that,
or because they use I use Amazon, I buy Amazon.
Yeah, but they don't know.
They don't know that AWS is the biggest part of the business.
Or they don't know what the net debt to EBITDA, and their bank loan, or where their intangible assets are valued against their tangible, or what the short interest is, or what their MACD's done, or what. And right, and actually, there's a horrible stat. I think I said last time that only 5% of British adults have got stocks and shares ISA. I think it's a bit more than that now, thanks to people like you guys and me in a smaller way. But that's been growing. But it's still a relatively small, a worryingly small percentage of the adult population.
More cash ISAs, which.
I'm actually, that's right. But the other thing to say about stocks and shares ISA is I had sight of a very big ISA provider's data not that long ago where they'd done an evaluation of what their clients own in their stocks and shares ISA, and it's basically 2.3 tech stocks. So even though 9 million people now have a stocks and shares ISA, the vast majority of them
Tesla and Google, and that's the lot.
Exactly.
So no funds, just individuals.
Yeah, a load of them. A lot of them do have S&P 500.
But like a lot of majority are just individual stocks.
So then to come back to your point, it's okay. What is schizophrenic? What's that? What's it? The Dark Knight Rises. Who's the character with the
Two-Face.
Two-Face.
The coin flipper guy.
Yeah, forgotten. Harry Two-Face or whatever.
I know who you mean. It's Two-Face.
He's in the Dark Knight, not the Dark Rises.
It's called Two-Face.
Two-Face. So I'm Two-Face because I'm like, ETFs are brilliant. Like, why are we all in ETFs? But what I'm trying to do is so Occam's razor, like 80-20 rule.
Yeah.
Anyone, it's much better that people who aren't invested and people who haven't heard about investment, and when they want to get started, they invest in a big ETF, an equity. So that for sure.
Yeah.
But what I'm trying to do is fight what is being really disruptive and destructive to capitalism, without wanting to sound too hyperbolic, which is that, so last year, the London Stock Exchange raised less money from initial public offerings from new companies coming to the stock market and using it to raise money to do stuff than the Omani and Malaysian stock markets, and we raised a 20th of what was raised on the Indian stock market. London fell to 22nd in the world, right? And a huge reason for that is because the inexorable rise is passive, because all the money is from private client stockbrokers, from retail, we were just talking about retail punters, is none of that is going into what it would have gone into 30 or 40 years ago in my parents' or grandparents' generation, which is like, if you had a few quid and you were in your 40s or 50s and you had a financial advisor and stuff, some of that money would have gone into a UK smaller companies fund. And that would have funded, in my day, what I was involved, EasyJet or Games Workshop or, any number, lastminute.com or whatever. That money's gone. I mean, this isn't like a slight problem. It's gone. All the small cap funds are gone. And what I'm saying is each of these, and by the way, the other reason why Jeff Bezos and Elon Musk are so wealthy, because this is the other point, is that when all the money flows indiscriminately into S&P 500 funds from all over the world, there are all these self-reinforcing things that happen, right? So basically, if you run a Fortune 500 pension fund in the States now, you can't do anything other than put your pension, your staff into an S&P 500 ETF because it's cheaper and 90% of active fund managers underperform and all these sort of nuanced arguments. So now, and a load of congressmen in Congress have effectively had the wool pulled over their eyes because they're not particularly financially astute by Vanguard and State Street and BlackRock, right? So all that money is going into a market cap weighted ETF of the S&P 500, which means all of that money, or a huge amount of money, is going into Amazon and Apple and Microsoft and Tesla. And so it's these sorts of structural things that are making the rich so stratospherically richer than they ever would have been in the sort of the older system before this happened. And I think that is problematic, right? It's a winner. It's turbocharging winner takes all. Because US equities are performing so well, everybody else in the world, if they're in Zurich or Tokyo or London or Singapore, is getting into US equities because they want to be left behind. So that turbocharges it more. Then you've got all the hedge funds who use algorithmic strategies, which are largely momentum driven, turbocharging it still more. And so all of that bun fight of capital just going into the 500 companies in the S&P 500 is problematic because it means that you've got this winner takes all thing. You've got vast income inequality, which Gary Stevenson's right about. He's right about the problem. He's wrong about what caused it and what to do about it, in my considered opinion. I'd love to talk to him about that one day. And what that has meant is that, if you're an entrepreneur who wants to do, a new software company or launch a new hotel group, or, I was excited to be on the deal where we floated Carluccio's and La Tasca, which was a tapas restaurant, and all these sorts of businesses. Nobody can do that in London anymore because all the oxygen, all the capital is stuck in the S&P 500.
How many UK businesses listed on the American market? So rather than just looking at the UK market, if you zoom out globally, because I know that Monzo threatening to go to America.
And all our big ones, loads of, Arm Holders, one we talked about before.
It was like privately bought by SoftBank.
So actually, relatively few, and I covered this in our Futures Biotech in detail, specifically pertaining to the biotech industry, but it's true of all companies. There are a whole load of structural reasons why it's very hard for a British company to float in America, right? Obvious ones like it's really expensive. So, in the old days, a small British company might be able to float in London for like £1 million, let's say, ballpark. It's like $5 million to get onto the NASDAQ, right? There are hundreds more companies on there. So getting the attention of the institutional fund, like when London had like 150 small cap funds and all the stockbrokers knew who they were, and if you were the CEO of an entrepreneurial company and you wanted to do something, you could go around those 150 investors in Edinburgh and Manchester and Leeds and London and go and do a load of meetings, and they'd go, yeah, I'll give you £2 million for that, or no, I don't like your business and I won't. And you'd be able to gather money. If you now need to go to America, well, America's already got, in 2019 or 2020, there were 78 biotech IPOs in America, right? It's all the same people stewarding the pots of money. So getting the attention, like it's just a prosaic logistical challenge. Like a British company, plus the British company is on a different time zone with a different tax regime. So there are all these reasons for American investors to say no.
What's the scariest word in the English language to me?
Tax.
How does it make you feel, mate?
Stressed, sweaty palms, squeaky bum time. Don't
Mum's
like
spaghetti.
it. Mama's spaghetti. Yeah, exactly. You got one shot, one opportunity to not go to jail for avoiding tax. No, I don't like tax. It's scary.
Tax can be really stressful, which is why we're excited about our partnership with TaxZap. They started in Ireland and now they're in the UK, and they make self-assessments way less scary.
What I like is how quick it is. You just enter your info, connect your bank, and it helps you do your expenses to reduce your tax bill. You suddenly know exactly what you owe, no waiting around for an accountant to reply, and you can file in as little as 15 minutes.
Yeah, and it's built for all kinds of people. Company directors, freelancers, the self-employed, side hustlers, or even people who work full-time who need to do a self-assessment. For example, anyone who needs to claim back high rate tax relief on their pension at work.
They're HMRC recognised, so they're safe to use. Plus, TaxZap flags reliefs and benefits you might miss, so you're not leaving any money on the table.
We've left a link in the description. Prices start from £49. If you've got to do one this year, check out TaxZap. You can get 10% off as well using the code in the link in the description. The code is MONEY10, so that's MONEY10. I mean, how would they even know what Monzo is? Yeah, it's crazy that you would go listing in a foreign market and they don't even know the business.
Notwithstanding everything I'm saying right now, it's incredible the extent to which, because we've destroyed British institutional capitals just being killed, and almost all of it's either in American shares or in bonds, which is part of why the British economy is so challenged. Something that's incredibly poorly understood and I've written about. But, even to your point, an awful lot of the companies that are succeeding in raising money in the UK are raising American money, tragically. But anyway.
So what should I do as an investor about this? Because there's still that contradiction of you should buy a global index, but it's actually a big problem. And
when I'm remonstrating about the problem, I'm not talking to I'm basically trying to agitate to the powers that be and leading bankers, and because we're all
what would they do then?
Well, the Mansion House Accord, or the changes that Rachel Reeves is making right now, are a direct result.
Mandation of pensions into the UK.
Yeah.
You think that's a good idea?
No, I think it is a good idea. I think the way it's been done is terrible.
Okay,
right?
How would you do it?
So I would have. Actually, nuts and bolts, so you had a whole bunch of smaller company funds in the UK that banged out 12, 13, 14% annualized returns for years, because of businesses like Games Workshop, right? I mean, I don't know if you know, Games Workshop was a tiny little ridiculous company and not for
never ridiculous. Chaos Marines.
Yeah, same, exactly. I was a
serious hobby that.
Warhammer 20,000.
40,000, 40K,
40,000, that's slightly embarrassing. But so it is 20 years.
You were part of the 20K.
I was loving it and can't remember the name of it, but it was a long time ago, to be fair. But yeah, I used to paint orcs and Eldar and stuff like that. And it was like,
you redeemed yourself there with the Eldar.
See, I was just making up for calling it Warhammer 20,000 in error. But, that was a little company that come out of Nottingham, and it's, what is it now, £5 billion company? It's just awesome, right? And We could have far more of those if we had a much better stock market. But anyway, sorry, I've forgotten.
How would you go about mandating people to invest in British companies?
I think the problem is in the listed world, like stock market listed companies. And if you had, a few dozen funds in the UK that had 200, 300, 400 million quid like they used to, then you could float companies on the London Stock Exchange and there'd be an aftermarket to support the share price of the companies on the London Stock Exchange. And our world-leading biological science could get funding, which it can't right now. And everything else, our tech, or whatever, instead of a very few, very, very lucky few British companies managing to float on NASDAQ.
It's not a lot of money to 200 to 300 million.
Yeah, but
I know that's, you know what I mean? In the grand scheme of things, when we're talking trillions in the modern world.
Yeah, but the way you get to, the problem is we've just, almost every great success story is a story of compounding, right? And the compound effect. So to my point, Apple, what was Apple 25 years ago? I want to say it was a $5 billion market cap company. It might even have been smaller at the bottom, right? After Next and all that stuff. And now it's a 3.5 or whatever it is, trillion business. If it hadn't have been able to get from 5 to 10, it wouldn't ever get to 3, right? And that's just how stock markets and capitalism work. Like winners win and get bigger and consolidate. But if you don't have an ecosystem of creating any of them, then you'll never get any big
Couldn't the
future
government
companies.
chuck this money into a fund? Because 200 million in the government sense is a rounding error, right? So like that. If you're saying that,
so I'm not sorry to be clear. I'm not talking about only 200. I'm talking about a number. Like if you had billions of pounds. So what they're doing at the moment is they're basically mandating loads of pension money from 19 of the biggest pension funds in the UK to go into private equity and VC at the totally the wrong point of the private VC cycle.
Aren't they all like going to blow up?
Yeah, correct.
Private equity and VC.
And it's like. I don't want to be.
Yeah, they're all exposed heavily to the AI side of things.
But they're also just. Well, and by the way, part of the challenge that P and VC have right now is the IPO market stopped working for all the reasons we're discussing. And the way that these companies get their money back and get the money back from making an investment in a private company is by floating on a stock market.
Yeah, by dumping it on the retail.
Yeah, so what you need is billions of pounds going into stock market investors, because the stock market's worked for 200 years until about 3 or 4 years ago, and when death by 1,000 cuts since the 70s. But just a policy I wrote about not that long ago, a very tangible policy. So there are 600,000 births in the UK every year, right? If you gave every one of those kids $5,000, that would cost 3 billion, right? So every year, 3 billion, 3 billion, 3 billion. That doesn't sound much in the context of AstraZeneca that's worth 200 billion or Shell that's worth 170 billion or whatever it is at the moment. But actually, if that money was mandated in a tax sheltered account for the individual who's got it, like it's a personal account that you have in your life, and the worst thing that you might do is just never touch it. But it was mandated into like 10 or 12 UK small cap funds, like used to exist until a few years ago. And it was only allowed to be invested in UK smaller companies. You'd have 3 billion in year 1, 3 billion in year 3. I mean, in 10 years, you'd have put 30 billion quid to work in UK smaller companies. That's like half of AIM. That's a lot of money, right?
At 18, it could then roll into the DC auto enrollment. Yeah, it could become more globally diversified. But you've got that.
My argument would be you should never be able to take the money out until you're 55 or 57 or whatever the retirement age is. And UK smaller companies, the Numis 1,000, the 1,000 smallest companies in the London stock market from 1955 to 2021 returned an annualized return of more than 16% per annum. So imagine if everybody had $5,000 in a tax sheltered account that supported British business. 3 billion doesn't sound like much, but it's 30 £100 million IPOs. That's 30 new companies that have all raised 100 million quid, right? And the 100 million quid of capital that goes in might only be for 10% of the equity capital, because that's what happens when you IPO. You float a minority largely, right? Which means you've created a £1 billion company with a £100 million IPO. So you could create 31 £1 billion companies if there were that number of companies.
And then you start to pull in investment from the rest of the world, because the Americans go, oh, I'll take some of that UK exposure.
And that's the other point. Momentum, success begets success, and momentum is super key. We've seen in America, sadly, we've seen the 180 degrees opposite of that in the UK because of the way we've behaved in the last 30 years. But that's exactly right. Rather than London smelling and everyone going, oh, let's short London, people go, oh, there's this really cool new initiative which puts 3 billion quid a year into, and then there'll be a whole ecosystem of other fund managers growing up going, hey, if we're going to have a UK smaller company, sitting on the side of this new initiative. And then you get American and Asian investors and European investors saying, hey, there's a really resurgent London equity scene in small caps. I honestly think The only reason this policy would never be implemented is because the politicians who implement it today, it'll be people 20 years ago who get the massive political result from it. Right?
It's a cost on top of a cost. Because
it's only £3 billion though.
I said the exact same thing, did those numbers, and I basically said, no, anyone born from today shouldn't get a state pension, and it should just stop there. Like cigarettes, and we drag up the age. Yeah. Basically, if your kid's born today, they won't get a state pension, but they get this £5,000.
Yeah.
We show them the numbers.
Yeah.
And also, I said, you could mandate that a portion of that was in the UK market, so Rachel Reeves gets what she wants there. And I dare say that parents would watch the rate of return on those savings and go, holy crap, they're beating us. So you get adult participation in the market.
But the other ancillary benefit of that, all of which we're doing 180 degrees the opposite of through terrible policy. And just to be clear, terrible policy going back to the 90s, all the way through Blair and Brown and Tories, and now even worse, right? But the other thing is, not only do you sort out this pension situation, to your point, which is super exciting. I mean, in 25, 30 years, you'd have a complete revolution. And
the cost stays fixed at $3 billion a year if the birth rate
it will go up. And it might go up a bit as we get wealthier, like a lot of things. But it means you'd have a thriving economy.
Yeah.
You'd have loads of little, you'll have like computer game developers in Dundee that can raise 100 million quid to develop the next Grand Theft Auto. Or, you'd have like... Right now, one of Britain's biggest problems economically is we just can't, nobody can raise any money. I'm telling you from first-hand experience. In the very, very tiny few, and biotech. I know about biotech because I spent 10 years working in and 3 years writing a book about it, right? British intellectual property and Nobel Prizes that were won by Cambridge University and other places absolutely categorically underpin the economic value creation, the equity value creation that has happened in the biotech industry, right? The UK's, what has accrued to the UK of that is trillions less than what has accrued to the US because of all this stuff. So if we had a thriving, there are companies that are a few years away from effective cures for certain cancers. There are companies doing absolutely incredible things. We're employing AI and machine learning to do drug discovery and loads else besides, right? We can't fund any of it. We literally can't fund any of it. There's no, biotech companies in London, 14 of the last, 14 biotech companies to IPO on a stock market since 2018, 13 of them didn't do that in the UK. And it's much harder to do it in another country when you're based in Oxford or Cambridge or Edinburgh or Dundee or Bath or whatever. It's much harder. And then eventually these companies get acquired for 300 million quid by an American business or by Takeda in Japan or by whoever. And all of the staff and all of the tax revenues and all of the intellectual property moves to America, which is impoverishing Britain. That means we have tens of thousands fewer higher paid jobs for scientists, and we are not making hundreds of billions of tax revenue that could have been making. Sorry, you guys, I've really got to apologise for ranting away.
That's right, mate, don't worry. Is it only the government that can solve that? Because I sit here and go, I got 20 quid, I'll give you some money. What can I do?
There is...
I'm not being flippant now. Seriously.
I think the problem is
I'm sick of waiting for the government to do stuff.
There are a number of things the government could do, like what we just said, like give every child, $5,000 on the day they're born in a tax sheltered account they can't touch, and invest it in UK smaller companies. I think that is an amazing policy that but it would take years to turn the ship around. But, we need a much more enlightened tax policy. In terms of capital gains, national insurance. We have 78% of people in this country agree with Gary Stevenson, think that a wealth tax is a good idea. It's a disastrous idea. It would make Britain way poorer. It would drive even more of these businesses away, even more of our intellectual property. And I say all this because I just think it's a statement of fact. I think anybody who doesn't, the only reason that nearly 80% of British people can believe that that's a good idea is because they don't understand wealth. They don't understand equity markets. They don't understand how businesses are built, how tax revenues are paid, how tax is paid, how economies create wealth. And the trouble, and it's all very easy to go, bloody billionaires, they've got loads of money. But but a billionaire is just somebody who's created a load of wealth. So if you drive, Nick Skronski's just decided to go to Dubai, right? And wanker who's gone to Dubai. It's like, I think a lot of billionaires believe that they can deploy capital for the benefit of our species. And if you're based in a country and you care about that country for the benefit of that country, better than the government can. And I would say, based on my own reading of things and 30 years studying such things and working with companies, in the main, I tend to agree.
Wouldn't an individual say that they can deploy capital better in their own lives than the billionaire can on their behalf?
Yeah, but then
the compounding you're
talking
talking about
made recently
works for the billionaires, right?
We're far too focused on wealth inequality, and we should be far more focused on wealth. Because like the reason that, if you really want to get cynical about it, a huge part of the reason that there is inequality is merit times compounding. And I've done this example before, but like if somebody gets if two mates leave university at 23 years old, and they're both 100 empirically in terms of work ethic, health and fitness, money, education, right? And one of them gets 1% better every month, the other one stays the same. 30 years later, the one who gets 1% better every month will be 35 times better off than the one who stays the same. Not twice or 3 times, 35 times better off. So if somebody gets 2% better, and what might that mean? That might mean that they know about accounting, they understand investment banking, they do computer programming, they keep really fit, they eat really well, and their mate spends 6 hours a day on screens and goes to the pub every Saturday. And I know it sounds really harsh, but the bit that people miss is just the sheer power of compounding. Because if you get 2 or 3 better than somebody else every month for 30 years, that's why you have billionaires. But along the way, a lot of billionaires have created enormous good for our species, like as we said with Bezos. And I think the problem is the other thing that's poorly understood is if you interrupt that compound trajectory and go, we're just going to take all your money as tax to spend on stealth bombers, or you want to read a book called Squandered by a guy called David Craig, no relation to mine, which is about how Blair and Brown pissed away £1 trillion. And it's just all the details of all the 400 quid light bulbs in the NHS. And it's just private sector companies don't do that, right? Elon Musk can launch a rocket for about conservatively a 20th per kilogram payload into space of what it cost NASA to do it. And once Starship's fully up and lights, it'll be a 200th. Why would you have the government launch things into space for 200 times the cost of getting private sector to do it? Private sector is not always better than the public sector at all.
I have to push back.
But it often
not
is.
because I disagree with you, but I could also say that Elon Musk has done a lot of other stuff that people might go, that probably wasn't that good, that man has that much power. He is an ego. He's an individual with an ego. He gets butthurt. He faked being a good gamer because he's that much of a child.
And he made that pedo comment about that diver.
Oh yeah, the diver. That was years ago as well.
Fine.
But should someone like that have 400 billion? Should they?
But he doesn't have 400 billion. Again, this is the point. This is the bit about people just don't understand what wealth is.
He'll be able to borrow against that value.
Notional 400 billion of equity.
He's got 400 billion pounds worth of influence. He has.
Because the trouble, there was a time in the last couple of years. What did Tesla do in the last couple of years? At one point it halved, right?
Yeah.
So it's like the valuations accorded to billionaires, by people who don't understand the difference between equity and cash, right? They just think about like James Dyson's a wanker, because he's worth 15 billion quid or whatever. It's like the equity valuation that underpins that wealth is incredibly capricious. And it's based on a multiple of earnings or other expectations or assumptions about what that is worth. And it can very quickly disappear. Anybody, Nokia was worth 200 billion euros, and then it was worth 1 billion euro, right? So all the wanker billionaires that owned loads of Nokia stock, well, not that long after they weren't. So it's like, I hear you, but I think...
Is it anti-democratic? Is it like, it's not one man, one vote, it's
I think
£1 billion, one vote?
I think it is anti-democratic when you have
much power.
Look, Trump at the moment, how much did Trump just diddle the crypto market for personal gain,
please,
right?
I'm trying to stay zen about it.
Right. So there's... I'm not saying it's perfect. I'm just saying that big picture when we zoom out and really interrogate what wealth is and what it means, the government to a great extent, government does things incredibly badly, incredibly expensively, and incredibly inefficiently. And a lot of billionaires, and like Musk and Bezos are the headline ones, but at a much quieter level, a Finnish family that developed an amazing diesel engine, right? Company like Wärtsilä or Kona. When you get into a lift, in any building around here, Kone or a Travelator at the airport, right? It's a Finnish company called Kona, which means machine in Finnish, and it basically, makes all these travelators. What I'm trying to say is there are so many wealthy families out there, wealthy entities, that have delivered so much value to the world and done it way more efficiently and refashioned the periodic table for all of our benefit way better, in my opinion, than another, $400 million fighter or smart bomber or, any of the other things that governments piss money away on. So I just think, all I want to say is I just think it's for this whole, like, it's the richest fault. I think we need to think a bit more deeply about, who deploys capital better. Like, is it a good thing to just have more tax and give the government more money? Because the other thing I want to say about that is, today, government, everything's shit, right? The economy's shit, society's shit, mental health is rubbish, all the stuff we're worried about. Wealth inequality is terrible, and government's the biggest percentage of the economy it's ever been. Is the answer more government? Well, surely not.
A lot of that was borrowing, right? 10% of that bill is debt because we all chilled at home.
That's right. And monetary debasement, right? And the Cantillon effect. But there's been a trend for
I don't want to sound like I'm defending wealth taxes. If you want my opinion, I don't know. I just don't think it's as simple as it's the immigrants' fault and it's the rich's fault.
Agree.
I never think
100%.
the populist, these extremes of like, all those boats and Jeff Bezos, it's their fault. I don't think it's probably, there's probably a load of nuance.
But I think it's worse than that. I think
it's
a classic example of turkeys voting for Christmas, right? If you want to, because the point I was about to make a minute ago is, on the journey, and whatever we do or do think about Musk, let's just say on the journey where a billionaire builds a business that becomes worth $100 billion, right? If there are tipping points where if the zeitgeist in the country they're in is such that they just go, do you know what, I can't be fucked. And not because I'm a greedy bastard who wants to spray myself in champagne every day, because I want to have control of the economic value I've created for the benefit of mankind. A lot of very wealthy people think like that, truly. They think, Musk thinks that there's a risk we'll all get killed by an asteroid, right? And he has a passionate desire to get us off and have an interplanetary civilization and be in Mars. We can debate whether or not that's a good thing, but that is his North Star of everything he's doing, right? And I just think that I've now lost my thread.
You shouldn't call rich people evil. I sit here, I don't sell courses, I try and give everything away for free. I can make loads more money if I just turn the screws on monetization more effectively. But I don't, because I have a purpose or mission that drives me beyond that I think I want people from places like me to be able to access the information for free. And I can concede, or I can believe that there are lots of people out there that have similar missions in their core, and that some of them might become billionaires. And just because they got 9 zeros in the bank account doesn't make them a prick.
But also, you can't become a billionaire unless you've created a shitload of value for society. Truly, it's the opposite of that Balzac quote.
Or you've extracted from the environment, potentially. I look at Ineos and I think, like, they've probably done loads of good stuff, but then I look at the business and I'm like, this is a pretty dirty business, Jim Radcliffe. So,
but every time we buy Viacal or whatever, right?
But it's a pretty dirty industry. So maybe it's like you've created lots of value or you've extracted lots of value from
But I think there are really pretty serious guardrails on all of that, right? Like, the Environmental Protection Agency in the States and blah, and we all know there are problems with those things, but we have built a system over 2 centuries where that's got better and better and better, and kids don't get churned up in machines in factories at the age of 9 anymore, at least not in most of the world.
He trips his kid up just to toughen him up.
I push him over, I don't trip him up.
He's 2. He's like, oh, go on.
On the
to be fair, he's a unit now. Yeah, it's like conditioning.
How old?
He turned 3 last week.
But what size clothes does he wear?
Like 5-year-olds clothes. 5 to 6.
Well, you're not exactly small, right?
No, definitely not. I was going to say, on your point about billionaires are better at deploying money capital than governments.
Well, they can be. They often are. Not always,
and
but
Damien pushed back with Elon. But I mean, you use Starlink, don't you?
Yeah, but shit.
Yeah, but how good's your internet in your area?
It's all shit.
Exactly. He's gonna put a satellite in space to give people internet, and that's better than the internet that's been given to Damien in this local area by the government. So it's like,
it's also £100 a month, which is pretty pricey.
But it works better, doesn't it?
But he was like, we're going to give cheap internet to the world, 120 quid a month.
And by the way, the other thing I wanted to, in terms of the turkeys voting for Christmas, have a wealth tax, blah, blah, whatever, is the government's the biggest it's ever been, which is also, I'm right, like, it's also a key cause of inequality because it's something called the Cantillon effect, right? And this is where it gets, this is like, John Maynard Keynes said not 1 man in a million understands inflation, which is a bit punchy because that's like 8,000 people in the world, but there are plenty of people who don't understand it, and they don't understand these mechanisms. But like, when the government artificially suppresses interest rates with quantitative easing, money printing, when the government prints loads of money, right, that makes equities more valuable. Why is the S&P going up, 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 up? Because it's in depreciating money because it's monetary debasement. If you look at M2, the
dollars it's priced in are getting worth less.
Correct. So you look now. What does that do? It makes normal people's lives much harder because they don't own S&P 500. They don't own property in central London. They don't own gold and silver. Like it's called the Cantillon effect, and it basically means that the more government is involved, the more money printing there is, the more monetary debasement there is, which we've been doing in size since the 70s. Government's got bigger, government's printing more money, government's crowded out the private sector. That creates income. That is front and center why we have such bad income inequality, because that is what is driving Jeff Bezos's stock up and Elon Musk's stock up, right? And all the rich hedge fund people in London who have, multi-million pound properties, and why nobody can get on the property ladder, right? Now, the answer to that is not more of it. Like self-evidently, right? Anybody at economics is like, no. If you have a bigger government and more tax and less real wealth creation, the Cantillon effect is stronger, and the rich get even richer. And
I guess the people on the tax the rich side would say, and again, I just want to, I'm just trying to have a debate here that to mirror what the comments might say. People might say it's not tax the rich to raise more revenue, it's tax the rich to redistribute, so you tax work less. So you might reduce taxation on income tax and increase it on capital gains, increase it on inheриtances, increase council tax, so you tax the wealth at a higher rate.
And I hear that, but the very simple insight is whatever you tax, you get less of. The problem we have in this country right now is we're not creating enough.
You want work, right?
Well, but also you want wealth. Because like if you...
but should they not be taxed at parity? Should they not be taxed at the same rate? What's more important, wealth or work?
There's a great stat. There was a study done of 3,500 of America's wealthiest families, admittedly quite a long time ago, but it found that 70% of very wealthy families lose their wealth within one generation, 2 generations, and 90% within 3 generations, right? So
you lose 100% of your labor within one life. So should you not tax that at a lesser rate than stored wealth and be like, if you've lost your money in one generation, I'm sorry, but that's it.
I think what we've all, again, this goes back to the compound effect of how wealth is created, is like...
Through labour.
If you nip... but increasingly intangible assets as well, goodwill, right? It's not... Labour's a shrinking... Labour's not, well, particularly in the world with their AI, but we're getting very esoteric. But like... The flourishing of any economy that delivers real, properties and computers, and walk into any, Boots or Superdrug or Aldi or Lidl or Waitrose and just stop for a moment and look around you at the miracle that you're looking at, right? Compared to what anybody had 100 years ago, or what my grandparents had, right? All of that is real wealth. And the thing is, all of the stories of the thousands and thousands of entrepreneurs and people who've delivered all those products in the supermarket, whether Branston, it sounds ridiculous, Branston pickle or, Cathedral City cheese or stuff that's rather more complicated and more expensive, or in PC World. On that journey, I'm telling you from first-hand experience, having worked with hundreds of entrepreneurs in my life, if you have egregiously overbearing wealth taxes, people just give up. They just go, I'm not going to I can't be up. One of a really well-identified problem is in Britain is called the vicarage problem, which is that why does Britain not have any trillion-dollar companies or really, really big companies? Because basically most people in Britain, when they become wealthy, just want to buy a vicarage and retire to the country and, and stop, right? Most people in Britain, which I think is probably quite a good feature of our national zeitgeist, if you're worth 20 million quid, you stop. Whereas in the States, people want to go and go and go and create. And I don't think that's necessarily true, because I think there are a lot of, it comes down to a lot more than money, to your point you made earlier about being mission driven. If you have a mission, the money's for most people like that, it's not about the money. The money is just giving you economic agency to go after your mission, whatever that mission may be. And, and I think that we basically live in societies where a lot of those missions are really good for mankind.
We could sit here. I want to ask you about public services and how they make poor people's lives better, and should we leave that to private individuals? But I think we get on a whole nother tangent if we did.
Look, I think that a lot of the things government does is really good and really important. Don't get me wrong, but it's just we've gone way, way, way beyond what it should be, right?
Coming back to the book, if you had 25-year-old you sat next to you there. What's the one thing that today you would say to them that might surprise them about personal finance and the way your views on the world have changed?
It's taken me, 30 years, the best part of 30 years, to distill out this kind of 80-20, this is most of the result you need for as little effort as possible, right? 2 or 3 funds, defensive, aggressive, whatever, gold. And I wish my 25-year-old self had known that and hadn't put quite a lot of money into Croatian land or, some of the stupid shit that I bought. Actually, sorry, I bought a big plot of land in Montenegro with
At
with
25?
a city bonus, a little bit older than 25, but it was, and I've still got it.
I was going to say, you still got
I've still got it, and it's either worth $2 million or
$2.
or Marko Brinkovic or whatever his name is has got my cash and bought a new jet ski or whatever, and a jet ski, several jet skis. And so I wish I'd been able to say to my 25-year-old self, look, here is a really plain vanilla way of building wealth, like the way I now have written about for the last 10 years. Because my God, if I could have just done that a bit sooner I did it pretty soon anyway, or a sort of a version of it. But if I'd been able to do it exactly as I would now do it when I was 25,
you wouldn't have made the stupid
mistakes.
mistakes.
I'd have a shitload more money than, I wouldn't have land in Montenegro.
You interrupted the compounding, basically, through buying your
I
Montenegro
did a fair number of fairly random things with my money back in the day, which I wish I hadn't have done.
Have you got the land still, or is it?
I have, yeah. Well, allegedly.
Have you been to it ever?
Oh yeah. Oh. It's pretty cool. I mean, it's one of those things where if I had the time and got a consortium together, we could build like an amazing boutique. It's one of the most beautiful places in Montenegro. And I could get a group of people together and raise a load of money and put a hotel there, and it would be cool. And we'd probably make loads of money, but I don't have the time.
When you say allegedly, do you think every other day shows another person around?
Yeah, correct.
Look at all.
I wonder how many people own that plot of land.
As far as the eye can see is yours.
It's all yours.
It's like
Wherever the light touches is yours, son.
The whiskey, the people who own that whiskey. Did you see that documentary about all the whiskey scams and like elderly people buying casks of whiskey from unregulated?
The same was the Scottish Lord thing in America.
Yeah.
The entitle you or whatever. They were.
I'm a Thane of Scotland.
Yeah, exactly. And everyone in England's like, obviously you're not, but they took it really seriously. That you could buy like a metre square patch and become a lord.
Genius.
Yeah. I mean, they made a lot of money.
Yeah,
They were sponsoring YouTubers aggressively, and their accounts come out and they were making like 7-8 million a month. It basically selling air, nothing.
Amazing.
And they just bought one field and they just cut it up into little tiny blocks and just,
Should definitely tax those people more.
Yeah. So you would tax that. That's a robber baron, isn't it?
Yeah, correct. Crooks.
Well, thank you so much, mate.